Tucker's back.
The iron law of the universe. True things prevail.
New questions today about why he really left and whether or not investors had anything to do with this. We'll discuss. Plus, what is Fox trying to do to him now? All kinds of bad stuff coming out. Will they actually bury him? Can he survive on his own? Joining the show, Stu Does America, Stu Burguiere. He is in the house. We're going to discuss. And Jerry Springer. Oh, Jerry Springer, 79 years old. This guy was like the king of, well, reality TV, everything bad in TV. He was a brilliant guy. He will be missed. Jerry Springer, dead at 79. We're going to take a look back at his legacy and some of the very best moments. There's plenty of them. Biden, meanwhile, literally has the media in his pocket. I mean, like quite literally. I got to tell you all about this. Take a look. And speaking of Biden, the administration is coming out with a new plan that, well, frankly, is pretty darn socialist. They're going to charge people with higher credit scores and more money saved up, all kinds of extra fees when they get mortgages because, you know, you got to cover for everybody else. We'll get into the details of it. And First Republic Bank, really taking it hard today. Stock way down. It brings the whole banking system back into question at a really delicate time as we look at this whole debt ceiling disaster. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the program. I am Trish Regan. Portions are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. Let's start with Tucker Carlson. I showed some of this to you already. I just got to point out his little clip got more views, more viewership than any of his Fox News shows. Watch.
The undeniably big topics, the ones that will define our future, get virtually no discussion at all. War, civil liberties, emerging science, demographic change, corporate power, natural resources. When was the last time you heard a legitimate debate about any of those issues?
So you see, Tucker's making the point that it's very difficult nowadays to tell the truth. Don't I know that? Don't we all know that? And when you do speak the truth and you give full on what you're thinking, sometimes, well, people get a little bit mad. I experienced it myself. I mean, I had a lot to say. Don't forget, back in March 2020, Fox didn't like it very much. So I've been in his shoes. Although with him, it might even be different in that very interesting story today that someone pointed out to me. I am still trying to sort of track this down, whether the company BlackRock has as big a stake in Fox as Forbes is reporting. Now, Forbes is a pretty reliable source. I mean, they're saying 15%. That number feels really, really high to me, unless it just happened recently. But I did ask one of my investor friends to check it out. And I'm getting back actually some news right now. My friend says it's actually under 5%. That's what's indicated on Bloomberg right now. So on the Bloomberg terminal, suggesting that BlackRock owns under 5%. And well, keep in mind, BlackRock owns about 5% of everything. So maybe we're reading too much into that. It may just be as simple as these text messages that were on his phone that were disparaging possibly to some of the female executives, disparaging to the Murdochs themselves. Maybe that was what did it. I mean, we'll find out more, I'm sure. Already, Fox seems to be trying to separate him from his audience. I think they want to bury him because we're seeing all kinds of reports that are coming out in the Wall Street Journal, for example, owned by none other than Rupert Murdoch, that Tucker had used the C word when referring to a female executive. That's come out. He apparently talks about whether or not something's going to work with his postmenopausal female viewers. That's been reported in the Daily Mail. So drips and drabs, right? Plus you get the Abby Grossberg lawsuit out there where she's alleging this misogynistic environment. I have a feeling that the folks that be there over at Fox may want to try and separate him, take him down a little bit, but good luck. Well, why would that matter? You've heard me talk about ESG in the past. I've done whole shows on it. This is environmental social governance. It's the prism through which investors look at companies nowadays because, hate to be so old fashioned as to just look at profitability and earnings. No, we don't do that anymore. Who cares how much money you make, how profitable you are? We care about how socially compliant you are. Do you check all those boxes? Do you have a green enough energy footprint? It's going to be kind of hard for an oil company, right? Do you have an equal ratio of men to women? What is the Black population, the Hispanic population, the LGBTQ population? Do you have this person, that person, and his or her cousin? Everybody else on your board. I mean, this is kind of crazy when you think about, I'm investing in a company because I want to make money. Well, there's this layer. There's this layer called ESG, and it was actually BlackRock that really took this to new heights. I want to point out that BlackRock, which is owned by Larry Fink, is kind of like a revolving door over there at the White House. At least in Democrat administrations, BlackRock has had a lot of people sort of go in and out of various departments within our federal government. In fact, the guy who's now head of the National Economic Council, Brian Deese, he's the former head of ESG, environmental social governance, at none other than BlackRock. So the BlackRock thesis is we can control the social environment with money. If we just say, look, we're not going to invest in this company, then this company will do what we need them to do. And when you think about companies like Bud Light, by the way, Dylan Mulvaney's got a whole new deal with Maybelline. We're going to talk about that. When you think about companies like Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch, when you think about companies like Fox, you wonder how much of this pressure is playing into what they're doing. I would have to think that the investors were not happy with Tucker's reporting. A lot of people, right, were not happy with Tucker's reporting. And consequently, there was most likely a lot of pressure. I don't know if that would be enough for Fox to do anything. I think that money does matter, and I think that he made them a lot of money. So I'm not saying that that was the reason, but I think we need to at least consider it because we're in such a politically correct environment right now where you can get so easily canceled. Your company can get canceled. Shareholders would bolt because it's all controlled with this one big asset manager, which has a whole lot of power. I mean, this is why you have states like Florida and Kansas saying, wait a second. We had the AG from Texas on the show the other day who said he's sending letters to BlackRock and he's trying to warn them, like, you know what, guys, this is not really a system that's going to ultimately reward those that are investing with you. And by the way, like all the pension funds all over the country, they're all investing. Teachers, firefighters, police. Everybody's investing through BlackRock. BlackRock then turns around and says, okay, I like you, and I don't like you. So this ESG score, it could have played a role. I mean, I think there's other things too. And by the way, you got to wonder, is like Fox going to totally try and bury him? Because have you seen the media stories? Think about the Wall Street Journal story. This is interesting because this one's owned by Rupert Murdoch. They pointed out the other day that there was a text exchange in which Tucker Carlson referred to a female executive with an extremely derogatory word, begins with a C. And it goes on. There was another story in the Daily Mail today talking about how he had allegedly talked about postmenopausal women and all kinds of other bad words. Well, that's not a bad word, but more bad words like the C word.
What could it be?
Fox is probably going to try and sort of break him apart from his audience, but good luck. Good luck, okay? Because he had a very big following. He has a very big following. And when you consider him going out and doing that little blurb on Twitter, I mean, he got a ton of views. And people are very anxious for him to come back. So Stu's joining the show, Stu from America over at The Blaze. He's going to tell us a little bit more about what he thinks is next in line for Tucker Carlson. I mean, Tucker certainly has a lot of opportunities. Okay, so Tucker Carlson, big deal in media. You know who else was a very big deal and who actually has passed away? That's Jerry Springer, 79 years old. Jerry Springer passed away today. His family released the news saying that he had pancreatic cancer. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer just about 3 months ago. Look, I will say this. I mean, Jerry Springer, wow, the guy was a legend. Total legend. This was reality TV long before there was reality TV. This was cable news long before there was cable news. You know, the fights you see on cable news, the crazy big ideas that you would see on cable news, all of that sort of started in afternoon programming with like Jerry Springer. But it was more than just cable news-esque. It was really reality TV-esque and TikTok-esque. Jerry. All right. We want to take a walk down memory lane here. There's titles like, I hooked up with my wife's mother.
This is funny, huh? No, that's my mother. Baby. That's my mother.
Baby.
Oh my gosh.
Kids. What would you do that for?
I wouldn't think, baby. I was drunk.
Why would you ask her to even do it?
I'm sorry, baby.
You're sorry. You weren't thinking you were sorry then, was you? Huh? You weren't thinking you were sorry then.
Like this show was so over the top that it became like, you know, an adjective. If something was Jerry Springer like, you can see why. Okay, so this is a guy that's been communicating with somebody online that he thinks is this really cute girl. And it turns out, it's a really large man dressed as a girl.
What was attractive about her?
We have a lot of things in common. We both very athletic people.
Yes.
Both love going to the gym.
Here she is. Here's Dolly.
Okay, so clearly, he was onto something before the rest of the world was. I mean, these shows were done in the 90s. He was a big deal. He was like the king of afternoon talk. And it was kind of, well, how shall we say, sort of down in the gutter. But it almost feels quaint when you consider what TikTok is today. Anyway, Jerry Springer, he really was a legend. He was clearly a really talented guy. He was a lawyer. He was the former mayor of Cincinnati. He used to work actually for Bobby Kennedy. I mean, just a really storied career. And he tapped into this underbelly of America and exploited it in a way. And people were like, oh my gosh, can that really be real? And I would just say, yeah, a lot of it, it's not like these people were actors. I know someone who used to work on the show as a booker. It's a high pressure job because, you got to find like strangest people you could possibly find. And this is before you had TikTok. So Jerry Springer really exploited this in an entertaining way and effectively was P.T. Barnum reincarnated. And he laid the groundwork, so to speak, for cable, for reality TV, and for some of the worst things you might see on TikTok today. And somehow it was allowed. Imagine that. Somehow it was all allowed. It was kind of a different time, and it was certainly sensational, but it was allowed. We're in a different environment right now. Again, something that Tucker Carlson alluded to in that clip that he released last night, a different environment where it's hard sometimes to really tell the truth. And it's hard, especially considering that the administration, Joe Biden, has the media in his pocket, like literally. So this is from the press conference with South Korea, and he's up there speaking, and he's going to take some questions. But you can't just take questions from anyone. No. These questions in this administration, somehow they have to be pre-screened, and everybody has to tell Joe who the reporter is, who he can talk to, what her name might be, what the question might be. This is Courtney Subramanian. She's from the LA Times. I mean, let me just tell you how bonkers this is. I've been a journalist my entire career. You do not give presidents questions. You don't give anyone questions. I mean, that is just kind of a no-no, like no-go zone. The most I can ever think of is saying, hey, we may talk about this and this. You might tell a guest that just so that they know, like they can be prepared. Okay, we're going to talk about the economy today, or we're going to talk about this particular law or whatever, but you're never going to actually give a question. In this case, like it's the actual question.
Oh, God, cheating!
And this is the LA Times. So that's kind of scary, right? That the administration is handpicking who gets asked the question. And he's got his cue card saying, all right, Courtney, you're next. This is really outrageous, and it's very controlled. And it really begs the question of, how much freedom does the press really have in this environment? I can tell you just a funny story. I remember years ago, I was a correspondent at CBS News, and Obama was speaking, and this was before he was president. I was out there covering the campaign. I went up and I threw a microphone in his face and asked him a question as he was coming down the stairs. And one of his handlers came over. He answered it. I don't even remember what the question was, but his handler came over to me and said, "That was unacceptable. You are not to ever do that. And you are going to pay the price for that." I'm like, whoa, buddy, I'm just doing my job. Now, compare and contrast, say, Joe Biden with his cue cards to Donald Trump, who would take questions like all day long. I mean, his staff would be like, come on, we got to go. And he's like, one more question, please. And they would be questions that were all over the place. Nothing was vetted in advance. And in fact, part of his problem was he answered all the questions, right? And he answered them sometimes maybe a little too truthfully.
Why do you keep using this? A
Because
lot of
it
people
comes
say
from
it's
China.
racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China.
Ooh, deep state sure didn't like that. Anyway, Joe Biden is running again for president. And you can't help but look at this video and say, really, really, buddy? I mean, it's like Weekend at Bernie's, right? He's got the sunglasses and everything. There's this sense that he's just this prop that you put up there, doesn't really know which way to go, doesn't know which reporters to call on, doesn't know what time of day it is. But that's not going to stop him from running for president. Even though 70% of the country does not want him to run. I mean, that's the latest poll number. The Republicans, I'll tell you, if they can't beat him, there's no hope. There's no hope because he has done such a terrible job with our economy, with our foreign relations, and with our border. It goes on. And we are far more divided now than we have ever been before. So he should be beatable. I say should be. And I say should be because, as we know, it is very challenging to communicate directly with people and to tell them exactly what you think. In the case of, for example, what Donald Trump was saying about the spread of coronavirus and where that may have come from, you couldn't talk about the Wuhan lab, remember, forever? Like, finally, we can talk about that now. But that would get marked as misinformation. And whatever Fauci was saying at the time, that was sort of gospel, and that's what you had to go with. And if you dared to suggest anything otherwise, you were in hot water, you were suppressed, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, if you said that the Hunter Biden laptop was in any way, or if you alluded to it being in any way real and anything other than just misinformation from the Russians, again, you were immediately scolded, shut down, hit with misinformation, or worse, in some cases, people lost their ability to access their social media accounts. I was one of them, actually, because of a Hunter Biden laptop story. So this is something that really, I think, should concern society overall and may have an effect on how the presidential race turns out in the coming year. I mean, it's coming right up on 2024. Anyway, just as all this news started coming out, I sat down with Stu Burguiere from The Blaze. He hosts Glenn's show with him in the morning, Glenn Beck's radio show, and he has his show, Stu Does America, in the evening. I sat down with him to talk about the future of the media and specifically, of course, Tucker Carlson. So lots going on, lots. First of all, the Tucker stuff, like this isn't going away. We keep learning new things. What's your gut feeling? Do you have a gut feeling? I mean, what the heck went on? How did they get rid of their number one star?
You know, it's a fascinating story because you wonder if Fox News is getting to a point where they're risk averse, right? And that's a huge problem for conservatives in general. Fox has done such an incredible job at trying to maintain some sort of balance in this country, bringing to the country much needed perspective that is outside of the typical mainstream media bubble. And, if Fox is changing in a way that they're getting scared of people saying things that are out of line with the mainstream narrative, that is a terrible development, not just for cable news, not just for conservatives, but for the entire country.
You think that's what it really came down to, fear?
I mean, this is going to be the $1 million question. And in fact, much more than $1 million is that question here. It's a lot
almost
of money.
$1 billion.
Yeah, it's going to be, and the fact is, of course, they're going into their negotiations for carriage fees with these cable providers and satellite providers now. And there's a question of whether that has something to do with this. There's, of course, the potential of, look, I think
Fox. You might have hit might have hit the nail on the head. I mean, I'm talking out loud. I don't know. I have no inside information about how any of this went down, but I think that might be relevant. I mean, look, one of the reasons they wanted Tucker was because all the cable providers wanted him theoretically. I mean, I don't know if they really want him, but the viewers did, right? So even if advertisers were like, I'm not advertising on Tucker's show, it didn't really matter because you got good cable fees. And the cable companies would be like, yep, well, my viewers want Tucker. And if you don't have Tucker, like, what else do you got? That could have played a role for sure.
Yeah, and this is the vast majority of their business, right? Like, certainly advertising is a chunk, but really what fuels Fox News and especially multiple big cable companies, or cable channels, but Fox News is really like number one or number two, not in cable news, but in all of cable television. So this is an incredible draw, and you're ripping off the guy who is driving the ratings on that network. I mean, it really is unprecedented in a lot of ways. We've seen other big high-profile hosts leave Fox News under varying circumstances. I was there with Glenn when he left on his own accord, I might add, even though everyone has reported that incorrectly, and they do it every time some host leaves. But still, it was one of those situations where going back to what you said about Roger, I think you're right. Like Roger had a real, for all of his problems, had a real vision for what the network was and believed in it. And I think the hosts that were there realized that at times, as long as they kind of kept the company line and didn't criticize other hosts on the network and do things that were erratic in that way, they would have some sort of backing if their opinions were a little bit different.
Yes.
And look, Tucker, I agree with you. I agree with a lot of the stuff that Tucker says, not everything, but he was unique in his ability to be able to drive the news cycle and kind of just grab it by the collar and pull it over to where he wanted to be and create a conversation. And, I'm sure you're the same as me. I don't go to shows just to agree with the host. I want to hear different perspectives and I want to be challenged in what I believe. And Tucker was very good at that.
Very good at that. No, very, very gifted broadcaster in that sense, and really just had an ability, and still does, by the way. I think the guy is going to go on to do amazing things, great things. Yeah. And we live in a world now where creators can do that, and he'll have full ownership of it. So it could be a very exciting time for him as an entrepreneur. But what does Fox do? I mean, I've joked, like, we can compare them to Bud Light. They just got rid of their biggest star, and viewers are going to be angry. And we know what's happened before. I mean, they've always pulled through, but they got rid of Bill O'Reilly and people were like, oh, and then, Megyn Kelly left and there's been a lot of upheaval. And the question is, can they still attract viewers at 8 o'clock? Can you put a monkey in the seat basically and still get them because it's the platform itself?
Yeah, look, there's certainly a lot of strength in that platform. I do think that, Tucker, Bill O'Reilly, Megyn Kelly, and Glenn Beck, yourself as well, when you're there and you have a host that's really can draw in an audience and engage people, you hate to lose them. This is a difficult game to be playing. The Bud Light comparison's a really great one because I think Bud Light kind of was seen as like untouchable, right? Every sporting event you go to, it's just there. You take it. It's never going to go down. I mean, it was never great beer. People didn't drink it for that reason. Yeah, exactly. It's watery, but it is available and relatively cheap, and people like getting drunk. So it was there. And it's funny because they did something that really shook their audience. Will this be the thing for Fox News to do that? I think, and in some ways, they panicked too much after their call in Arizona, and that really angered a lot of their viewers. And you can see the behind-the-scene texting of them really panicking about people going over to Newsmax. And while, of course, you want to be competitive, they should have probably recognized they still had Tucker Carlson there. They still had a lot of the top talent there. And they panicked in ways that probably wound up hurting them in the lawsuit and some of these other ways. The Tucker part of this is really interesting, too. When he's got that choice to make now where he can go and if he wants to be an entrepreneur and, he can make a lot of money. There's a lot to that. There's hiring sales staff and hiring IT people and all these other things. Or he's going to get...
Tell me about it.
Exactly, right?
No, I mean, it's not easy. You're like, wait a second. I know how to be on camera. I know how to write a good show. I know how to do an interview. And now I have to do all this?
Yeah.
I have to hire all these IT, sales. Yeah, I gotcha.
Believe me, we left when we left Fox, we went to an environment in which no one knew how to stream video. I mean, this is before any of that happened. When you try to stream it, it would buffer every single time you tried to play a show. And Glenn, had to work to try it with his people here to try to make the infrastructure work. And, it was a lot. Yeah. Tucker's going to get a lot of money thrown at him by a lot of companies if he's a free agent. And, he might just say, look, I can keep my influence. I can have all the infrastructure built in. Let me collect a giant paycheck and do my show with no restrictions. And that's a pretty appealing process.
It's hard though. I mean, I think, and probably, you guys felt this way too. When I left, and it was not an ideal situation because it was sort of like, wait a second. Okay, we don't like what she said. And even though, by the way, management had they used to sign off on my commentaries every night, which I hated. And by the way, this is the freedom I have now. And nobody has to sign off on anything I do. The algorithms may shut me down. Hey, but at least I'm true to self. But anyway, they'd sign off on it. But in this particular case, they would not back me. Right. So like when the vultures came out and the media was all over, there was no one to help me. And I thought, why would I ever work for anyone that's not going to support me in what I'm saying and doing, especially when they're the ones that signed off and approved it? Like that, to me, it was such a kick in the stomach Really. And I wonder if Tucker, I'll have to talk to him sometime about it. I wonder if he felt the same way, because it's sort of like you're just gutted. You're like, wait a second, you guys were here. You guys, everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, it's too much and it's not. So that's tough. And so, sure, to your point, he could go and work for somebody else, but simultaneously, there's a real sort of peace of mind, I think, in doing what you and Glenn have done, and to just kind of have ownership of something yourself. It's meaningful.
Yeah. And, the good thing is there is a conservative media ecosphere that's kind of available to people that was not available when we first left Fox.
Yeah.
There are companies that I think do have your back. I will say, like, we had some real dust ups early on in the Fox days. There were some real questions. Glenn got into a little bit of trouble here and there, as you may have heard. And when Roger was there, he typically would back Glenn, even in difficult times. It felt like you had a little bit of protection. I think your situation's a really interesting one in that you didn't say anything crazy. You didn't say anything wild. And I think there was a real change in Fox News. And I think you're seeing that even more now with Tucker. It's going the wrong direction. And if the
media pounces, Roger would never let any of his troops go down, right? Because if they take one, they get the whole army. And I think he had that mentality, whereas now it's like, whoa, when things get rough, they'll just start feeding you to the wolves. I also had the negativity of being on opposite Tucker at 8:00, which, by the way, I didn't want and I didn't choose, but they somehow had the brilliant idea that they would put on another show to compete with the mothership, which obviously it was never going to compete with. We didn't have that kind of viewership. But even when you're getting a few 100,000 a night, and if he's neck and neck with Rachel Maddow, it's not ideal, right, from a business point of view. And I understand that and I get it. But look, I mean, it's a very different culture over there. What would your advice giving? And again, everyone, we're talking with Stu, who, by the way, your show, Stu Does America, every night, 8 p.m. They should check that out. They can watch on YouTube, on the Blaze.
Yeah, please do. A podcast
all
is
those
available
good places.
as well.
And it's important right now. It's important because you guys are truth tellers and you've got great opinions. And I want to get to them in a second because that could be sort of under fire in this moment. But what's your advice to Tucker Carlson, given that you've been through this sort of startup environment? What would you and Glenn as well, what would you guys say? Here's what you do.
Well, it's fascinating. Of course, we don't know the details of his contract and everything. He may have some restrictions, but look, I think he is at the position where he has a somewhat developed possibility to go to a company that can help him. I'm not making any formal offers, but Blaze TV would be one that he should consider. I think there's a lot out there where, it's different. You can have huge audiences. I know you have a huge audience. We have a lot of big shows here at Blaze TV where you can go directly to the people. It wasn't possible before this. You needed someone like Roger to kind of change things up. And now that's available to him. So if I were him, I would be looking at offers, signing a contract that gives me a gigantic check, and then feel completely free to speak your mind and have all the influence that you want. I mean, he really is in that position, and not many people get there.
Yeah, no, it's a very, I think it's sound advice. I think it's good advice. And I wouldn't be surprised if he takes that advice at one place or another. So he doesn't have to work on the IT and all that good stuff, but can just focus on the content, which he does really, really well. Let me ask you about the future of the media right now. You mentioned that Fox may be getting a little bit scared. We saw that basically 51 spies came together at the request of Antony Blinken, who got his friend Mike Morrell to round up 50 more, and put out a letter saying that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation. Keep in mind, it was sort of the same cast of characters that told us that there was some there with the Trump dossier. It turned out the Trump dossier, the dirty dossier, that was fake. And it turns out the Hunter Biden laptop was actually real. People got in like hot water for that, myself included. I mean, like, Facebook was awful to me because we published one story on the Hunter Biden laptop. Do you worry that that's going to happen again?
Did you ever get your apology for that, by the way?
No,
they ever come
I never.
back
I'm still waiting. They finally freed me up, by the way. Like, I finally on all these platforms, but I'm like, okay, people subscribe now, hit the bell, because I don't know how long this is going to go.
Yeah, I know. It's really sad, and you wonder where this is going to go. And the scary part about this is the 51 people who are in this, they're signing this document saying that this is Russian disinformation. at the behest of Antony Blinken, this doesn't lead to Antony Blinken being disgraced or shamed or tossed aside from any public role of influence. He's the Secretary of State. We've come to this place where people do things that are obviously wrong, obviously politically motivated. And now everyone knows, even the New York Times, that this was an obvious lie at the behest of the campaign, which was never disclosed at the time. And this guy gets to celebrate. This guy gets to have, one of the top 2 or 3 most influential jobs in the country and one of the most powerful people in the world, especially when you think of this, this particular administration where you have a president that can't really even speak. So you have a person like Antony Blinken who really has a massive influence as to what we're doing in the world right now. And, it makes you feel like there's almost no hope. I mean, I get there really quite often. It feels at times that everything is kind of hopeless. We do have to remember, of course, that it's, things have changed. There are ways to push back. I think this sort of secondary media, sort of a parallel media that has developed is really positive. And while we do get throttled by Facebook and we do get censored by all these institutions all the time, you've seen so many of these cases where that censorship occurred, where we've been able to turn around the American people to show that those viewpoints were correct, even with all those blockages in place. And I think that's a really positive way of looking at it. Capitalism has a lot of really positive features to it, and they can often, we've seen countries over and over again try to institute things like fascism and communism, and capitalism usually figures out a way to rise up and overcome them in the long term. It just
because it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Do you think, though, that we need more conservatives throughout? I mean, we talk about the media, and conservatives have sort of found their niche, if you would, in this sort of more splintered environment. But when you think about even Hollywood, and your colleague over there, Steve Deace, I was talking to him just the other day, that Nefarious movie. I mean, fantastic. It's doing really well, and sort of in spite of the fact that it had a conservative backing. Do we need, as conservatives, as Americans, right, in terms of making sure that both sides are kind of out there represented, and we're not clamping down on a particular side of speech? Do we need more of that?
Yeah, I just want a fair battle. I really believe that conservative ideals will win. They're better. I think when given the opportunity, people typically choose them. Even people on the left,
it's like natural.
Yeah, they can't help themselves. They can't help themselves being on Uber and having their iPhone, and they can't avoid capitalism even when they hate it. And I think that's a great thing. Capitalism always wins in the end. At least that's the way I'd like to believe.
That's for sure. We certainly don't want to be Venezuela. Hey, Stu, it's great to see you. Everybody should tune in tonight. Stu Does America. Check him out, 8 p.m. every single night, Monday through Friday. He'll be there. And I thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
I don't think there's really too many ways to slice it. The economy is a mess. We're barely growing here. That's what new GDP figures show. I mean, fortunately, consumers are still spending, kind of a miracle when you think about it. But, the GDP has shown a real vulnerability. We are not growing as fast as we should. And everything this administration is doing is basically going to ensure that we don't grow as fast as we should. Consider what's going on the mortgage front. This is like socialism on steroids. For goodness sakes, the Biden administration is introducing fees starting this coming week that will penalize people with higher credit scores and will penalize people that have more money, say, for a down payment on a house. This is all related to the mortgage market, and they want to make sure that those that have good credit, those that have saved maybe 15 or 20% to put as a down payment on a home, well, then they can subsidize the people that have bad credit. Is this like some kind of alternative universe? I mean, talking about perverting incentives here. You shouldn't pay your bills on time?
Fine by me.
If you pay your bills on time, you're actually going to get hit with a $40 fee every month on a $400,000 mortgage because Joe Biden thinks it's more fair, so that you can cover the people that don't pay their bills on time? I mean, this is the danger we're in, folks. This is a socialist style policy that would be very problematic long-term for our economy. It's kind of like the ESG stuff, right? Everybody's trying to decide from way up on high, top down, how things should work. We believe in this, this, and this, and therefore we're only going to invest in companies that do this, this, and this. Doesn't matter if they make money or not. Doesn't matter if your credit score is good or not. You will pay more to subsidize everyone else. This is a slippery slope. And I'll tell you, economies have been lost basically overnight. I have only to think of Venezuela as perhaps the most relevant and most recent example of an economy that's just been totally totally destroyed in a 20-year period.
Socialism!
Speaking of the economy, speaking of what could be potentially problematic on the horizon, shares of First Republic Bank, they have been struggling in recent sessions. I mean, up rather significantly today. Perhaps people are realizing, hey, Joe Biden's going to be there no matter what. But anyway, Barney Frank is on the board of this company. I mentioned him because he was the guy who was so instrumental in those no income, no asset loans. Remember, you didn't have to have anything in the bank. You didn't even have to have any income, but yet you could get a $500,000 mortgage. Like, that made a lot of sense. It just reminds me when we hear about what the Biden administration wants to do with penalizing people who have good credit, reminds me of Barney Frank, and the bank that he happens to be on the board of is very much in the news today. Again, First Republic Bank. Lots of fears that this one is going to have more and more challenges. I would just say, look, Biden has made it very clear. They are there to help. They are there to do whatever they need to do. Janet Yellen's told us that ad nauseum. And of course, the head of the Federal Reserve keeps saying this as well. All the more reason, I guess, for you to be a little bit worried about U.S. dollars, certainly over the long term. I mean, here we are coming up on the debt ceiling. There's lots of reasons, I think, to be worried right now, which is why many investors are seeking out safe havens. If you're one of them, if you're interested in finding some alternatives over the long haul, you can talk to my friends over at Legacy Precious Metals, legacypminvestments.com. That is their website, 1-866-589-0560. That is their phone number. You can also watch the interview I did with Charles Thorngren recently. He's the CEO of the company. He has a lot of, obviously, very deep concerns about the future of our country. Of course, he's also selling gold, so you're going to take all that into account. They are one of our main advertisers here on the show. They've been here from the very, very beginning. LegacyPMInvestments.com. You can buy gold and silver right there on the site. And somebody wants to say hello. You know, Fluffy. Fluffy wanted to say hello to you guys. This is my dog, Fluffy, and he eats something called Rough Greens. Roughgreens.com/Trish. If you're interested in getting this, there's a free jumpstart trial that you can get just by going and signing up right there. Roughgreens.com/Trish. I feed this to Fluffy because Fluffy's had a lot of allergies and I was trying to get a handle on it. Did this whole elimination diet thing. I talked to a lot of you guys. You had some good suggestions. And one thing that came up was Rough Greens. So I talked to Dr. Dennis Black. He's the creator of this, naturopathic doctor. And he convinced me. So I'm like, all right, let me give it a try. I sprinkle this on top of Fluffy's food every single night, and Fluffy loves it. He eats it up, and it tastes good. And I'll tell you, like, he can't talk, so I don't know this for sure, but he's been so much better. I have not been going to the vet with all the earaches and all the allergies that I used to struggle with him. So I'm very happy about that and happy to have them on board as well as a sponsor. Listen, we've got a big show this week. Eric Trump is going to be on the program tomorrow. You know, I think about what this family has been through, and it's not fun, right? Like, who the heck wants to get into politics? Who wants any of your family members, frankly, in politics? Because there's a lot of downside. And if you dare to be somebody who sort of doesn't fit the status quo, whatever, you're really in trouble. And by the way, it's not just Trump. I mean, think about what they put Romney through. Think about what they put Bush through. Think about how there is such a vendetta, if you would, against conservatives. And it goes both ways. I mean, look at what Biden's going through right now and his son Hunter. Look at what the Clintons went through. I mean, some of that stuff, I would just say, it needed to be addressed. CGI, the Clinton Global Initiative, that charity that is taking money from all kinds of places. Nigeria. I mean, there were questions that needed to be asked and were asked, but I don't think we got everything answered. So it's part of the problem with politics today. It's why I was so impressed with Vivek, who was on the show just yesterday, Vivek Ramaswamy, who gave us a lot of really, I think, good reason to have hope in the future and hope for young people, right? Because we need more young people in politics. Anyway, Eric Trump is having to deal with some of the legal nonsense that's been going on, which, by the way, is helping his father for sure in the polls, really helping him to blow past DeSantis, who's weighed down with all the Florida stuff that continues to make headlines. So Eric Trump's going to join us. We're going to talk to him about 2024. We're going to talk to him about the legal case. And if you have a question for Eric, I'd love to have you just weigh in on the comments there below. Put your question there. I read them all. I read them all. So make sure you do that. If you could, give it a thumbs up, share it. If you're watching on Rumble, on YouTube, do me that favor. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I should say, do make sure to follow the show or go seek it out there and do a 5-star rating if you would. I will see you back here tomorrow with Eric Trump. Have a good 24 hours.